Welcome back to the podcast, you beautiful soul. I have someone that I've been really connecting with over social media. I've been watching his content for so long, and he's got so much value that he's going to be adding to you guys today. Stefanos is a trained educator and relationship expert with a background in human science. He's also passionate about leading people closer to their highest potential. He helps men and women escape negative patterns and cultivate a positive sense of self and well-being, and restructuring and reframing their relationships with themselves and loved ones. And to be honest, that bio doesn't even give him the worth that he has. There's so much more to this man, and we're going to dive into a fair few topics today. Topics that I'm really curious about, topics that I'm excited to lean into and learn more about. Stefanos, thank you for joining me today, my brother.
Thanks for having me, Lewis. Appreciate it, man.
Man, we've been speaking a little bit on social for a couple of months now, and been loving your content, loving what you put out, loving what you talk about. Man, I'd like to know your story. I actually don't know your story of how you've become who you are today. So I guess for the audience and for myself personally, what's your story, man?
Yeah, well, I'll probably start with that brief bio that you spoke to then about being a relationship expert. I think any expertise I have in relationships is because I've fucked so many up and I've had so many challenging ones. Growing up, I'm sure many can relate, right?
Yeah.
So I just took the path of, well, let me eventually. It took me a minute, but let me eventually grow from this, and let me be better than I was. Let me deepen my own connection to self, and in turn, hopefully deepening my connection to others as well. Because I think relationships are everything. It's not a question of whether we're in relationship; it's a question of the quality of the relationship. And for me, it's the quality of the relationship to ourselves, to our worthiness, to our past, to our present, to our ambitions, our purpose, the people that we care about, our sexuality, our self-esteem, all of it. The relationship to things, to ideas, to beliefs, to trauma, to all the things that matter and don't matter to us. So I think for me, I formed this deep curiosity for the world because of my upbringing. I grew up in a very volatile, quite violent, abusive household, which was very confusing for my nervous system, very confusing for me, because at the same time there was also love in my household,
Yeah.
and it felt very disorganized for me. And so I developed this, I guess, curiosity and aptitude around what would it look like to live in a home, to live in a space that just carried more love and less uncertainty, you know, and a lot of that, seeing my parents, the way they interacted with each other, which was really quite loveless and quite angry and sharp and rigid and volatile towards each other, was my first real, experience of an intimate relationship, and how they treated me, and also seeing my grandparents who loved each other, but there was distance there. It was this working relationship almost, but they did care about each other, but that was also confusing because they didn't really express that emotionally. They weren't really open. They were more rigid with their way of being. And so this carried on into my adult life, into my teenage life, and the way that I saw the world, and I had a lot of repressed anger, and I drank a lot, and drugs, and getting into trouble and mixing with people that wasn't really that weren't conducive to the person that I was at my core. It was a person that I was being in a compensatory way, and fighting, and just wanting and needing to express my repressed anger. And it wasn't until I really got a hold of that I started changing from the inside out. And it wasn't really until I addressed, the ways I was avoiding my trauma and avoiding dealing with my pain through sex compulsion and sex addiction, through cheating, through, high stakes situations, through adrenaline seeking, that I was able to again reconcile and come to deeper terms with all of me, not just parts of me. These very quote unquote ugly parts that lived within me, these very disheartened parts that lived within me, these painful parts, these fearful parts. So, that journey still exists. It's not a one and done thing. I've been on
Yeah.
that path for a number of years now, probably a decade or so. Well, I've been in personal development for decades, but it was always more, this one of my compensations, right? I was helping others and not looking at myself. And
Mm.
there was parts of me that thought, if I can help others, and this is an issue that plagues so many therapists and so many coaches and so many practitioners, mental health practitioners in this place. There's this unconscious drive to help others, and we think somewhere unconsciously that we're, helping or fixing ourselves,
Yeah.
and we're not, because we're not doing the work on ourselves, in ourselves, for ourselves. We're doing it with others.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn that, the long way and the hard way.
Yeah.
And that's where I am today. I am today is someone that takes far greater ownership and personal responsibility, combined with empathy and compassion towards myself, with all the things that I am. But that journey towards greater self-awareness and greater self-worth has been, a journey, man.
Man, what a journey. And I'm sure there's so much more into that story that we can probably go a little bit into. What was I relate to a lot of your story, the self-development aspect, and then started helping everyone else but yourself. Growing up in the emotional, volatile family between mum and dad. Well, for me anyways, with mum and dad. Man, I'd like to know, what was the transition between the self-development where you were doing quote for others versus you started to look within and the mirror started to really come up and you started to really address that? Was there like a turning point? Was there a certain session you did with a mentor or a spiritual guide, or was it just something you experienced in a relationship where it's like, fuck, it's time to actually put the mirror back on me and stop trying to help the world and start to help myself? What was that point for you?
Yeah, the last thing that you said, and there were various turning points in my life, but the one that I took great and deep, profound, meaningful action on was the relationship where she found out I was unfaithful in that relationship.
Yeah.
And it was excessively and extremely unfaithful. And that's a subjective viewpoint. I get that. But there's an objective reality to that. I was excessively avoiding and excessively numbing and excessively running away, and seeing and witnessing and feeling her hurt in a way that I'd never experienced hurting anyone before brought up a lot of repressed memories for me and suppressed memories, and brought up a lot of trauma. And I eventually got to a point where I made a decision that there was no choice in going back to my old life. I had to make changes, and that meant going within, no matter what, no matter if and I said these words to myself out loud: if I commit suicide, if I end up in a mental asylum, I'm going deep within myself, and hopefully I come out of this a changed human, and one that is living more to my potential, essentially.
Absolutely.
And the gratefully the latter took place.
Awesome. Beautiful, man. What were some of those changes for you? Like I have a lot of coaches and people in self-development in my world, in my audience. I think for someone who was already in the self-development world for probably over 10 plus years at that time, what were like the changes that you made personally to really take that ownership and really to go look within?
Yeah, a number of changes, man, many. And so I was working with people, before that, counselors and psychologists, shamans, coaches, energy healers, etc. I really deepened that practice. So I surrounded myself with people that could really support me and call me forward on my behavior and my patterns and my pain and my wounds, and really facilitate a deeper nurturing there as well. So I really went all in a deeper commitment on that. Where I was spending hours every week with different practitioners, learning and growing and healing and releasing and sharing, and, pulling out all the shame that had been just tucked in the dark crevices of my space, of my internal space, of my internal psyche and heart, and really, bringing that shame to light so that it could diffuse and I could shed that pain and shed that shame. There was a lot of that. The other changes I made were, of course, a commitment to being more truthful, not being unfaithful, as an example, like looking at my patterns and my wounds and my compensatory pain points, and the things that I was doing in the world to numb, and stopping those things. I chose to start spending time with different people and looking at my peer groups, and that was a very hard decision to make, because my peer groups did nothing wrong, but they weren't necessarily facilitating the change and the evolution that I needed and that I wanted. And there was so much love for them, and there still is, but I had to start spending time with different people as well. And I started going deeper into solitude and not isolation, but more solitude. Initially it was isolation because I was so embarrassed and so much shame.
Yeah.
Then it moved into deeper solitude as well. I started practicing being more truthful in my words, in my commitments, in my deeds. I started reading a lot more, becoming more contemplative, spending more time in nature. There were a number of things that I did. There are some of them.
Beautiful, man. Man, you mentioned the word shame. I actually wrote that down before we started working, started filming this podcast. Man, I think from my experience as a man as well, there's been a lot of shame around my sexuality. I've
Mm,
come from a bad porn addiction, or quite, and even you heard the word there, bad. So there's shame around that still.
mm, yeah.
Where and that for me showed up a lot in my relationship, and it showed, and it's still something I'm honestly still working through as a man as well. And the shame for myself as who the man I am in the work that I do in the bedroom with my partner, being the partner for my partner. I'd like to know for you, man, what does shame, I guess, how does that show up in relationships, and what's something that people can do to start to work through it?
Yeah. So, I won't go too much into the story because it's a longer story, but I had a bout of shame come up a couple of days ago where I realized that I misplaced something 3 years ago. It's a long story, so I can't, but it's not worth going into. But it was something quite significant that I misplaced, and I was rattling my mind in how the fuck did I misplace this thing, and a lot of shame came up that I wasn't adept enough to make sure that I had this thing handled. And so the way that I approached it with my partner was just being very honest, saying, "Hey, I'm really embarrassed and holding a lot of shame around this, but I want to share it with you because it involves you and it's important." And so I just wanted to share with that. Now I led with bringing her the thing that I'm shameful about, as opposed to not telling her. And honestly, I didn't have to tell her. Like, she would have never known if I didn't tell her. But that's a practice that, which leads into both your questions, that I'm very deliberate with. So I'm going to share the thing that I'm shameful about with people that I trust and that I respect and that will hold that. And maybe in that moment, something happens where she just gets really activated and triggered and upset and she doesn't hold it. However, I know that we'll come back and we will repair. And it's in that repair as well, because there's trust established in our relationship. In that repair, we're going to grow together. So I'm focusing on the growth. I'm not focusing on the retraction and the contraction from the shame. And I'm focusing on the potential outcome that's going to yield the greatest result for me and, for both of us essentially. And that is to not hide, because I did so much of that growing up. Even as a kid, I hid my talents, I hid my expression, I hid myself, I hid my pain, I hid my desires and my wants. And that's impacted me sexually as well. Hence, visiting a prostitute or visiting many, many prostitutes over so many years, because you're paying for a service and you're in control, you're in command, so to speak, right? And so you have that opportunity. And it wasn't because I couldn't or didn't want to be with other women by, casually or just meeting them out. And I did a lot of that as well. I did all of it. This was the compulsion, right? Like I needed more and I needed more. I needed more distraction. I needed more validation. And so part of that as well was just, I didn't have a great capacity to ask for what I really wanted. But when I was in a transactional situation, it was easier, right? It's like I had leverage, so to speak, or I had, it was just okay. Like it was just okay to do that. It was accepted.
Yeah.
But that wasn't real. It was a contrived situation. And I knew that. My body knew that. I wanted more in the situation every time. It was what I was really craving, was intimacy and connection, to be seen. And so if I'm in shame, I can't be seen. I'm not seeing myself. I'm not allowing others to see me. So the example I gave you from a couple of days ago was I purposely put myself in a position to be seen, good, bad, or ugly. And that's the practice that is one of many practices that we can engage in that really help and support us moving out of our constriction, our contraction, our retraction that keeps us hiding in the world and keeps us hiding from ourselves.
Man, just I'd like to share something that came up as you were talking. I got told it years and years ago. It was darkness is untranscended light, or like shame disappears, or the darkness disappears with awareness. And it just, from even that simple sharing it, being able to, instead of hiding away and sort of keeping it deep within you, which actually sort of brews it up and probably attracts more of it into your life, just having the courage and the strength to share. Is that a bit of the psychology behind it? Is that the meaning for sharing it, to be able to actually confront that darkness that's in you and to be able to just, I guess, release it from you instead of sort of holding on to it and brewing on it?
Yes. Yes, we heal. Yes, absolutely. We heal in the presence, in the safe presence of others. Our nervous systems regulate in the regulated nervous systems of others. And so when we bring something that we feel is highly dysfunctional or highly dysregulated, and our experience this is why I said, trusted, respected, revered sources, right? And our experience of what we thought was going to be really intense or really, really heavy isn't, and it's more regulated, that's where we start to heal. That's where we start to get a new version of what reality could be like.
Beautiful, man. Man, there's so many topics, so I'm going to start flying through some of these. I would like to know just your definition and your view on masculine energy or the masculine, your view on the feminine, and the follow-up question from that, what's the difference between the wounded and the embodied version of both of those? So the wounded masculine, the wounded feminine, and the embodied masculine and the embodied in feminine. I'd just like to know your views on it, because obviously this is your world and this is something you're really in depth with. And yeah, I'd love to just know your views on that.
Yeah. So masculine feminine energy is something that it's connected. It is connected to biological sex,
Yeah.
but it's also connected to culture. It's also connected to metaculture. It's also connected to spirituality. It's also connected to the expression of duality and understanding the world in contrast. And so there are other terms that we can use. Michaela Boehm uses go and flow energy, do and be energy. There's active passive energy, there's giving and receiving. These are just energies that basically make up, these are energies, behaviors, actions, ways of seeing the world that make up who we are. And they create some level, if done and been in a particular way within the self, they create some level of homeostasis and greater harmony. When we're in homeostasis and greater harmony as a human, in our psychology, in our bodies, in our emotional expression, in our spirituality, etc., the four core domains of being human, what tends to happen is we are able to facilitate growth. We move into desired states of being. Desired states of being is a regulated nervous system. Nothing wrong with having a dysregulated nervous system per se. Sometimes we need to be dysregulated in order to take action that moves us away from danger or harm. Often, though, we're dysregulated from an emotional or social sense, which can be quite challenging because it's just within this constant form of dysregulation, which affects our physiology, which affects our worldviews, which affects our perception, which affects our sense of feeling safe in the world, which affects how we give and receive in relationship, how we give love, if we lean in, if we don't lean in, are we vulnerable, are we not? So there's a negative cascade effect of being too dysregulated. A desirable state of being is, for example, if I said, Lewis, guess what, man, I'm going to give you $100 million, US dollars, or euros, whatever you feel like, or great British pounds, $100 million tax-free, it's yours. I would say you would be pretty happy. You'd be pretty happy. I'd say you'd be pretty happy. I think you'd be pretty content. You'd be pretty grateful, content. You'd feel what we call desirable states within yourself. Now, if I said to you something more, something else, like something more horrific, like I'm going to pull you away from all your family, all your friends, all the things that you love doing, and I'm going to put you in a box and you're going to live there for the rest of your life. Literally a box, 2 meters by 2 meters. You're going to go, fuck that. You're going to start having anger, frustration, fear, despondency, undesirable ways of being. That doesn't mean these things aren't important to us, right? So it doesn't mean we can't derive value from them, but we start to recognize what's desirable and undesirable. So when we look at masculine feminine energetics and we look at wounded masculine feminine. So firstly, maybe this might help. This term toxic masculinity gets thrown around a lot in our society.
Yeah.
And what most people are implying by that is that the essence of masculinity or masculine expression and or even men are toxic, full stop. That doesn't make any sense if women and femininity isn't toxic as well. So for me, both masculine and feminine energetics and expression can be unsustainable, unhealthy, intense, wounded. They can also be beautiful and embodied and integrated and caring and all the other characteristics and virtues we assign to each masculine feminine realm. And we do that again because we learn through contrast. There's a richness in learning when we learn in contrast. And that's an important part of assigning particular characteristics to either masculine or feminine per se. But remember, they reside within us. So it's within us still, right? So if, for example, if compassion is a feminine virtue, it doesn't mean I can't have compassion because I'm a man, or I'm more masculine in my persona. Of course I can have compassion. In fact, practicing compassion is one of my biggest focuses in my life, empathy and compassion, It doesn't make me necessarily more feminine, but it does place me in a feminine energetic in that. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm okay with that. So when we look at wounded, masculine or feminine, it just basically means that we're coming from the shadow. We're coming from repression and suppression. We're coming from pain. We're living from reactivity. We're living from a dysregulated nervous system. A form of a wounded feminine expression could be manipulation. A form of or expression of a wounded masculine would be control or oppression or subjugation. Excessive vanity could be a feminine trait, a wounded feminine trait. So this is just really what it means. But just understanding that these traits, it's humans first, human qualities first. And ultimately, before we even get to a conversation of masculine, feminine, we want to understand what is driving that behavior, what is driving that expression in the world. And more often than not, it's undealt with trauma, repressed trauma, suppressed trauma, wounds from childhood or earlier years during our developmental era of being alive in this world and understanding ourselves. And once we start really working with that and dealing with that and applying healing to those areas, we become naturally more embodied and more integrated. We find our groove and what our dominant or natural expression is, or more, better word would be prominent, whatever our prominent expression is, whether it's more masculine or more feminine, or more combination of both, or whatever that looks like. And we find our own way. Does that answer does that response just explore the questions that you asked? Yeah,
absolutely, man. I think it's the reason probably it's coming up. One, I've been following you for a long time, and I hear you use those terms a lot. And I went on a podcast end of last week, and I do a bit of content on relationships. And he asked me the feminine masculine question, and I just told him that a lot of my work is not in relationships. My work shows up in relationships, and we'll probably go into the trauma question now as well. Because I go and I work with generally leaders, business owners, or people that want to be run their own business or just be successful in their personal and professional life. And we talk things about limiting beliefs, about self-image, about trauma, about understanding their purpose and direction in life. And it shows up the most in relationships. So maybe before we get to trauma, well, no, actually, it's in the same question. I'd like to know from you. This is a quote that I truly embody and I love and I live by. It's an iteration of Peter Crone's quote, so I've changed it a little bit to fit how I view it. Is that we attract people and circumstances to reveal wounds we haven't healed through yet or processed through yet, and you will do that more in an intimate relationship more than anyone else because they're going to see more sides to you than anyone else. So they're going to see more of those wounds and unprocessed parts than anyone else and shine that light on it to trigger it, to bring it to the surface, to give you the opportunity to heal through it. So there's my views on that. I'd like for you to lean into that and show, I guess, let me know about your views on relationships, how you help each other heal, how you, like even that shame example you used before was beautiful. How does a healthy relationship, how do they find that balance between challenging and supporting each other to do the work? Because I just truly believe, and I'd like to know if you do agree with that you will do most of the work in a relationship because they're shining those parts of you back to you and they are showing you those parts you haven't worked through. So yeah, I'd like to know your thoughts on that, man.
For sure. So I don't want to assume where Peter developed that quote from, but ultimately, yes, I resonate with what you shared. And so that, to me, I first learned that in Harville Hendrix's work. Keeping the love you find or getting the love you find is a number of different books he's written with his wife as well. And essentially he speaks to the imago therapy or imago dialogue, or the imago, which is this mirroring effect, right? And so, and I'm using maybe slightly different, I'm paraphrasing here, but ultimately, in adult intimate relationship, we seek what we both did not and did receive from our primary caregivers, both consciously and unconsciously. We seek that in our adult intimate relationships. So I'm very much in alignment with that. And I see that play out in my own relationships. I see it play out in all of the clients that I work with, is that we are attempting at some level to, replicate, and have a redo of what we experienced growing up, especially if it needs a redo, if it caused dysregulation in our physiology and in our and a schism in our psyche, that we can have a redo to re-empower ourselves, to learn to regulate our nervous systems, to get our power back. And we'll attract partners, particularly because you said it, they'll see more of us because of the living arrangements that we have, and the risk. The risk is greater in intimate relationship because there's greater vulnerability in the sexual expression, in the intimacy, in the lives intertwining with each other, right? They will reflect, and we will choose partners that will give us those opportunities. But in the moments, we see them as threats. We see them as danger. We see them as painful. And so we can't seize the opportunity to be different, but we revert back to what's normal to us, what's familiar, what's unconsciously familiar to us, which is, this is what I need to survive right now, so this is what I'm going to do, as opposed to behaving differently and actually breaking the pattern. And this is why so many couples, they split up too early. And what I mean by splitting up too early, because they actually don't do the deep work, which is the reason, one of the core reasons why they came together, because they're just not aware of it, because they're stuck still in the pain. That's where you need people outside of yourself. So to answer your question around what a healthy couples do, they have people in their corner. They have a team, like you've got a team of coaches. Well, I don't know if you do. No, I think you said your audience is coaches, but I'll use me as an example. I have a team of people in my life. I have coaches and therapists and energy healers and people in my life, and shamans and so forth, that can see different versions of me, that will call me forward, right? And so I have a team. So do Christine and I together as a partnership, right? We have our own individual team. We have a couples team too that help us, meeting each other with compassion and non-judgment at every step of the way, making agreements in our relationship with how we want to engage in conflict, how we want to argue, how we want to treat each other when we're not feeling great, how we want to treat each other how we want to celebrate each other when we are feeling great. Knowing each other's wounds is paramount. Knowing each other's trauma, knowing each other's patterns, being more open to discuss that, setting time during the week, during the month, to connect in really meaningful ways, in all the different ways that the relationship requires, like prioritizing that, right? So these are some of the things that we can do as couples, is like really prioritizing the relationship in that way, because ultimately you're prioritizing your growth. Yeah. And then coming back into, what are your commitments to each other, which is part of the agreements, but what are your commitments to repair? What are your non-negotiables in relationship? Understanding this. What are your aspirations and your dreams? Like really knowing each other and knowing self, ensuring that you have time together, as I mentioned, but you have space apart. Got to have space apart. Sleep in a separate bed a couple of nights a week, maybe even more. Like really have your own space. Spend time with friends. Have your own social network. Go on holidays by yourself. Like, and also go with your family. Like do all of, find that balance and create space to long for each other and yearn for each other and see each other. There are some things that you can do. I know I threw a lot at you, but
no, that was perfect, man. And a lot of things. I actually filmed a podcast with my partner yesterday, and we something that we do a podcast sort of every 6 to 12 months, just to update our relationship, our life, what's going on, and things we're working through. And something that we're, I guess, really conscious and working on is how to handle the triggers when the triggers come up. Like we had one come up a couple of weeks ago, and it was just learning to hold space, to allow each other to feel seen and to feel heard. But then the end part that I love that you mentioned is like the commitment to do the work afterwards. Once the dust is settled, like the question I asked my partner, because it was her trigger that came up this time, and it was like, babe, like just for yourself, what's your way of processing this now? What's your way of doing this work? Like I've got my ways, I've got my strategies, I've got my people that I speak with and how I do it, just so I can help you and support you and challenge you for what you need. How do you do the work? What's your way of doing this? And I just love that you did touch on that, which was beautiful. Yeah. I know I'm very conscious of time, so we're going to I guess one more question that I'd love to know, I guess your thoughts on, and I guess how you work with people. You mentioned self-worth, you mentioned trauma. I'm not sure if they tie into each other in your views, but I guess self-worth, how people actually, there's another topic I want to go into. We're going to go to the other topic, sexual energy. That was something that I've seen you post about a lot. I see you talk about a lot. What is it, generally speaking? And then what are the major challenges that you see with the work that you do with the people that you work with, and maybe some value about what people can do about it? So what is it? How does it really show up as challenges? And then maybe some advice for people to do some work on it.
Yeah, so sexual energy isn't just the act of sex or sexual penetration or coitus. To me, it is our personalities. It is our fears. It is our apprehensions. It is our values. It is the things that we desire, both conscious and unconscious. It is our shadow desires as well, the stuff that we don't want to share with too many people, that we may not even know about, but it does exist within us. It is our desire. It is our self-worth. Our sexuality and sexual energy is our self-worth and our self-esteem and our self-awareness as well. So there's a number of things that make up us who we are. It's our direction of movement in the world. I mentioned, I believe it's our personalities. It's also what we're attracted to and what we're repelled by as well, what we don't want in our lives and what we really do gravitate towards, not just from a sexual orientation place, which, by the way, that's part of our sexual energy, our sexual orientation, what we're attracted to and what we're repelled by, right? What feels safe, what doesn't feel safe, and all those things. So that to me is what sexual energy is.
Beautiful.
Some of the issues that you'll find, that we will find in our sexual expression, is shame again. So because we experience shame in our internal world, we hide parts of ourselves. And so when we hide parts of our personalities and parts of our desires, we're essentially minimizing our sexual energy. We're minimizing our life force, which is also part of what sexual energy is. It's our vitality, our enthusiasm for the world, right? What we're inspired by deeply, what we're motivated by as well. More inspired than motivated. And so it's going to show up in, shadow sexuality is going to show up in maybe being boring, not taking risks when it comes to intimacy, not having the confidence to ask someone out on a date, not having the confidence to ask your partner for a sexual favor or whatever that may be, right? Yeah. Or something that you like, or that you because you're scared that you're going to be rejected or humiliated. So humiliation, rejection, abandonment in sexual expression is very strong in people. So we withhold what we truly desire and expressing that desire, and then we start holding resentment towards ourselves. We don't like holding resentment towards ourselves, or at least the ego doesn't. So what does the ego do? It projects on the other person. It's their fault. They're too rigid. They're too this. They're too that. I can't trust them. Yeah. They're untrustworthy. So now we start to have schisms in the relationship, divides, bridges that are ruptured. You can't even get to the other side because the bridge is burning or it's broken. All because we're not connected to our sexuality. Maybe we were shamed for our sexuality. Maybe we were shamed for our bodies. We were shamed for our expression. Even just our expression in the world, singing. I have a wound around singing because a couple of different things that happened when I was a little kid, when I was like 5 and 6 years old. Actually 5 and 7 years old, I think. And so it's not so much now, but it was very, very big for most of my life, really until the last probably year or two. And so that's part of my sexual expression too, because I'm not using my voice in the way that I would like to in certain situations, because I'm carrying embarrassment about that or what people will think. I'm more preoccupied with what people will think, and people don't give a fuck. People don't care. Whether I have a good voice or a bad voice, whether I'm in tune or out of tune, most people don't care. Yeah. I care more than anyone else.
Yeah. I relate to that a lot, man.
Yeah. That's a big one, man. It's a tough one for me. Actually, it was a tough one. It's still tough, but not nowhere near as tough. So, but again, that's so connected. Like I can go back and see, and even now in my present life, where all of that still shows up in some way, not just in singing, but even in sexual expression as well, right? So there's a lot there, man. When we hide in one place, to sum it up, hide in one place, you're going to hide in many places. Simple as that.
Beautiful. And I guess some tips or some things that people can start to do to work through this stuff.
Yeah, you're like pick the low hanging fruit. Pick the fruit that's ripe. So again, like if you're blocked in one area, you're more than likely going to be blocked in many areas. So don't start with the thing that's most confronting for you. Don't start with sexuality. Don't start with sexual expression. Don't start with going to your partner and saying, "Hey, I really love to have a chain around my neck and for you to just take me around." Like if that's something that you've never explored and that's really risky for you and that's super new news to your partner, maybe don't start with that. Maybe just start with something completely unrelated to sexuality. Maybe it's about you taking, instead of going on holiday to the same place you always go to, say you're always going to Thailand, maybe you go to Bali. Or maybe you go to Norway. I don't know. You just go somewhere else. Maybe it's something like that. So just having a different expression, trying new things and asking for what those things are. Maybe you don't like the way that your partner makes the bed. So maybe you just ask for a new way that they make the bed. maybe that's the low hanging fruit that you touch on.
Beautiful, man. Last little question, because it's on the same topic, then we'll wrap it up. I went
Mm,
to my partner, she's very much into the sexual world. She's on her own sexual healing journey. And she's got a friend that she invited us to go experience this like burlesque show. And I've never been to one before. And we went there and it was a very amateur one. Like it was very confronting for me. And I was quite uncomfortable. And with my lens, I'm viewing through things. I'd seen people's traumas and how they play out. And like me and Georgia, like looked at each other, we're like, fuck, these people have a lot of work they haven't done, and they're expressing it through these sexual shows and how they're doing it.
mm,
And it was the question I couldn't answer it myself. So I'd like your answer on it, your thoughts on it. Where's the line between people who are using their trauma as an excuse to express themselves versus they've done the work and they're truly being authentic with their sort of desires and their explorations? Because people
mm,
could just do the default, I'm just expressing myself. Well, what's under that? What's underneath that? That's kind of my question, my thought on it. It's like, yes,
mm,
I get what you're saying. You can do whatever you want, do whatever you're inspired to. But what's the fuel behind this? Like, is there some stuff you haven't healed through and you're just using that
mm.
fire to go do these crazy shit, which is, again, fair enough. Do what you want. But yeah, do you understand where I'm going?
I do. Yeah. The answer's in your question. The answer is literally in the question with what you just said, the fuel. What's the come from? So if the come from is coming from a repressed or suppressed wound, an unresolved trauma, undealt with trauma, low self-worth, so you're now compensating. So you're validating yourself through selling your body in some particular way or selling your talents in some particular way, then it's just an unhealthy place that it's coming from. If you maybe have been wounded in that area and you've done deeper work about it and now you feel liberated and the come from is from liberation and expression, then that's your answer.
Beautiful.
And they both exist, right? Like, and some of those women or some of those people, and if burlesque is usually just women, right? If I remember correctly.
I think there was guys there as well.
Something that can be guys. Yeah, I went to a burlesque in Paris many years ago. I just can't remember if it was men there as well, but I'm sure that there are a percentage of those people that are coming from deep trauma wounds, and there are a percentage of those people that are coming from really liberated, healed places, and that are completely healthy in their nervous system and healthy in their being. I'm sure of it, just as a sort of law of averages, just from a mathematical place, I think it would exist.
Epic, man. Like I could talk for hours with you, but I know we're tight on time today. My last one before we'll get you to share where people can find you. What's something that you're working through right now that the world doesn't get to see?
I'm pretty transparent, man. I mean, we all keep things to ourselves, and I think we should at some point as well. Like, sometimes just vomiting unprocessed shit to the world isn't always helpful either.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's actually a way of distracting ourselves from doing the inner work.
Yeah.
But something that I'm wrestling with that I do share on my social, absolutely. But I share more in my email list, in my private email list. But this journey of fatherhood, man, it's been very, very challenging, like very, very challenging and very beautiful. The contrast has been fucking immense. Like the paradox is just uncanny. Yeah. And it's been the most liberating, beautiful, heart opening, coming back into my heart, coming back into my compassion, into my love that I've ever experienced with my daughter. And it's also been the most challenging, and I've been through the fire, man, in my life. Some of the most challenging times of my life, just with this new identity, and it's just, it's asking me to look at every fucking area of my life. We touched on a lot of sexuality today and self-worth. It's asking me to look at my sexual expression, look at my sexuality, and look at my desires and needs, and look at the way that I ask for things, and my personality and my habits and my patterns are the aggressive patterns that I have and the patterns that shut down. It's like asking me to look at this in ways I've dealt with them, but it's asking me to look at layers of this that haven't existed in my purview before. So that's a big thing that I'm working through right now, man.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate your value. I appreciate just the man that you are and the essence that you are and what you're doing for the world, man. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you, do some work with you, say thank you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate your kind words. Thank you so much. Any other social media platforms at Stefanos Sifandos. I believe LinkedIn is at Steph Sifandos because they didn't give me enough characters for my name. My website, stefanossifandos.com, and for the monthly breathwork for the feminine events that I run, which are really powerful 3-hour immersive somatic experiences. there's live coaching, there's integration, there's embodiment practice, and there's breath work. Stefanos.com/feminine as well.
Beautiful. Man, again, thank you for your time. I'm very grateful for it. I know it's taken a couple months to get this together. I'm fucking happy we did. For all the guys that have watched this and for whoever's listening to this right now, share this with a friend, reach out to Steph himself, reach out to me, share it on your story, send it to someone that you think will get some value from this. Brother, thank you one more time for your time.
Thank you, man.